The Jewish Religion, Its Influence Today, by Elizabeth Dilling. Chapter 6. Judaism is not monotheistic. To many Christians, Judaism is a monotheistic religion based on belief in one supreme being and adherence to the Old Testament, with the Messiah still to come. This is not so. Double talk is the trademark of Talmudic Judaism, called by the Christ the synagogue of Satan in Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. Talmudists sanctimoniously declare that their devotion to pure monotheism, or the unity of God, precludes their belief in his personality being incarnate in Jesus Christ, his Son, and we Christians keep silent. The unity of God, to which they refer, is actually the oneness of the pantheistic Enoch, a mass without a chief engineer. This is the unity of nature, in which the pagans believed. For every form of spirit invocation and the deification of man, that is Judaistic Talmudism, a religion of polytheism, or many gods. Slyly, the polytheists say what they mean. We do not understand them. Take any of the modern heresies, the new religions, our tried Christians like to think were just evolved. You will find them all in Talmudism and its collection of ancient Old Testament paganism. The Jewish Kabbalah, with its non-existence of evil, its deification of man, is a source book for modern isms, the source of which are largely unknown in modern times. Turn to the Jewish Encyclopedia article on Pharisees, Exhibit 264, and the statements that when the God of intelligence, the anthropomorphic God, was eliminated from the Bible by the Pharisees. Quote, these use the angelology and demonology of the Pharisees, with the help of the Mahasah, Bereshit, and Mahasah Merkabah, which is the pagan rites to see the sun god, Mithra or Metatron, and learn the past and future. Not only to amplify the biblical account, but to remove the Bible anthropomorphisms and similarly obnoxious verbiage concerning the deity by referring them to angelic and intermediary powers, for instance, in Genesis 1:26. In other words, the old mass of spirit or substance of which the universe is supposedly composed, God of the pagans called pantheism, or God as the sum of nature, left spirits or gods of every phase of nature to be invoked by man himself. The Supreme, in Sanhedrin 67b of the Talmud, boasts about the rabbis being able to create calves by, quote, studying the laws of creation, by means of which they created a third-grown calf and ate it, end quote. The Sefer Yetzirah presumably does the trick if the Talmud fails. And how they do other wonders. The sages are represented as gods indeed. The claim is made in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 65b, that Rabbah created a man, and this followed by a long footnote on the use of the Sefer book, Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, a part of the Kabbalistic lore of Talmudism, and its derivation from Babylonian and other occultism. Reference is made to Sanhedrin 67b, where the claim mentioned above is made by magic. The rabbis created a calf and ate it. This is followed by supposedly turning a woman into an ass. Creation by Hebrew letters is urged as a means of ascribing God's power to asinine objects, so as to dethrone him and enthrone man as the creator. This latter procedure is Pythagorean. One thus is advised that, quote, in uttering a charm, one generally expectorated. This is found in San, SANH 101a, that, quote, snakes and serpents may be charmed on the Sabbath, end quote. The dangers of Sabahiri, which is a demon of blindness, are pointed out, and reference made to repeating his name, each time dropping one letter until the demon shrinks away with the letters of his name, thus curing the blindness he causes. This is found in the Talmud of Abadoazara 12b. The cure under abracadabra is found in the Jewish Encyclopedia. The Tetragrammaton, YHWH, the letters of the word Jehovah, is reserved for summoning spirits, and it is a sin for the unauthorized to use the word. In the California Jewish Voice and other current Jewish publications, the word God is written G-D. For this reason, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, was fully pronounced only by the priests in the temple. Everywhere else, it was pronounced Adonai. This refers to the time of the Second Temple, when the Pharisees were in the ascendancy in Jerusalem. You can see Talmud Abadoah Zara 17b through 18a. Using the word as is one of the crimes charged against Jesus. You can see the Talmud Sanhedrin 55b through 56a. On this ground, Jesus is called a blasphemer of this repugnant Pharisee pagan custom. In Judaism, Baal Shem, which is master of the name, is the sorcerer who uses this name of God to make the demons mind him. And the Judaistic branch, Chassidism, also spelled Hasidism, is built upon this sort of demonology. Baal Shem Tov is extolled for his activities by Rabbi Louis Finkelstein in his work, The Pharisees. The use of amulets to drive off Lilith, demoness of childbirth, and of the night, who collects men's semen to spawn demons, is part of a current Pharisee demonology. By means of these demonistic devices, one may cause terror diffuse through the world. One's enemies set to tearing each other to pieces, cause anyone to perish. All this is part of the Kabbalah, or demonology of the Pharisees, called the art of employing the knowledge of the hidden world in order to attain one's purpose. One may thus easily make himself master of creation. Title: Blasphemy Approved. Not content with consistent reviling or blasphemy of God's word, this subterfuge is taught by the Talmud to permit blaspheming the divine name. Quote, blasphemy is an indictable offense only if it is mentally directed against God. If, however, one reviles the divine name, whilst mentally employing it to denote some other subject, he is not to be punished. Found in Sanhedrin 65a through b. Title: Jews the Messiah. The untutored Gentile has been led to believe that adherents of the Jewish religion are simply believers in the Old Testament who are still awaiting their promised Messiah. However, in Judaism, that Messiah is already here, and is the Jewish people themselves. For example, the Jewish Talmud, Kethaboth 111a, states, the Messiah is without metaphor the Jewish people, as it states plainly. Title: The Jewish Kabbalah. The existence of a spirit world, of evil spirits, is mentioned throughout the Bible. Christ drove out possessing spirits. There is one hard and fast rule taught on the subject, however, namely, to leave them alone and do no invoking or communicating with them. It is clear that spirit elements could deceive the finite powers of human beings. Quote, Exodus 20:3-5. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, is the first commandment, and that you shall do no bowing to or serving them is the second commandment. Whereas the Bible represents God as a supreme intelligence, creator and ruler, the pagan and atheistic Judaistic concept is pantheism. In other words, there is a great nature essence, out of which individual lives percolate blindly without direction. Pan, which means nature, and theism, which means Godism, holds that the sum of nature is God. Man becomes the all-powerful Luciferian God. It is foretold in biblical prophecy that the Antichrist will personify that concept. You can reference Isaiah 14:12-19, Daniel 11:36-38, Matthew 24:15, and Mark 13:14. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia of 1943, as to the Kabbalah, states, quote, although Palestine was the birthplace of Jewish mysticism, the land where Kabbalah was conceived, it was in Babylonia that it attained its greatest importance. It cites the mystic speculations of the Talmud and the system of the Kabbalah, originating in the one and reaching its completion in the other. End quote. The Jewish Kabbalah is a library of literature, all on magic, spiritism, and based on sheer pantheism. Aaron ben Samuel is credited with bringing the mysterious doctrine from the Babylonia to Italy about the middle of the 9th century. Thence, it spread to almost all the Christian countries of Europe. Kabbalah, also spelled Kabbalah with a C or a K, means tradition, and it is the tradition of the paganisms of Babylon, Egypt, and the pagan philosophers enshrined in the Jewish religion. Title: Kabbalistic Hasidism. The Hasidist branch of Judaism specializes in the Kabbalah. About half of all Jews were Kabbalists at the end of the 19th century, we are told. Hasidism, like so many Talmudic words, is spelled in various ways. Chasidism, and with a C and two S's, and H and two S's. The Jewish encyclopedias of 1905 and 1943 use the first spelling, however. Hasidism is called a religious movement within the fold of Talmudism, quote, which won over nearly half of the Jewish masses, end quote. Its leading promoter was one Israel Baal Shem Tov, shortened to the Besht. Father-to-son dynasties were set up of the Hasidist leaders, wonder-workers, fortune-tellers, invokers of spirits, healers, who employed drunkenness, singing, and dancing to create states of ecstasy. Evil was indulged in to purify it. Gershom Shalom, head of the Department of Jewish Mysticism at Hebrew University in Palestine, in his book of lectures delivered at Red Rabbi S.S. Wise's Jewish Institute of Religion in New York, extols Baal Shem Tov, the 18th century evangelist of Hasidism, as does Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, head of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, in his book, The Pharisees. Shalom calls Baal Shem Tov a true Baal Shem, that is to say, a master of practical Kabbalism, a magician. He closes his book with the prophecy that Jewish mysticism still has its greatest role to play, and that he certainly coincides with the Bible and the prophecies of the Antichrist and his wonder-working after the order of Satan, found in 2 Thessalonians 2:9. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, under Hasidism, states that Hasidism had not introduced any religious novelties into Judaism, found on page 240. To quote the Jewish Encyclopedia of 1905, quote, "The teachings of Hasidism are founded on two theoretical conceptions. 1. Religious pantheism, and 2. The idea of communion between God and man, which was adopted from the Kabbalah. Not only that deity influences the acts of man, but also the man exerts an influence on the will and mood of deity. Every act and word of man produces a corresponding vibration in the upper spheres. From this conception is derived the chief practical principle of Hasidism." Page 33. "Communion with God for the purpose of uniting with the source of life and influencing it." End quote. Pantheism is the oldest pagan concept of God, as being the composite of nature. The sum total of nature being God, man can be ruler of everything, if he but knows the right secrets. In Jewish Hasidism, Baal Shem, or master of the name, is also called a saint or tzaddik, who, to quote the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, "rules by the possession of the largest number of sparks of divine emanation. He stands on the same level as Moses and the prophets, and not only speaks with the authority of the Torah, but may even change and abrogate it. The Hasidism must live in submission to the tzaddik, or Zadok. Surround him with their love and confidence, bring him gifts, cater to his every whim, and not question his conduct, even when it seems to depart from the accepted norm." End quote. Title: The Kabbalah and God. The Kabbalah is the bone and blood of Talmudic Judaism, which is itself pagan from the start to finish. It uses the whited sepulchre of the Old Testament to cover its negation of every moral law in the Old Testament, as it promotes practice of all the occult demonistic abominations excoriated by the Old Testament. The Kabbalah has two aspects, theoretical and practical. Theurgic, wonder-working. The God of the Kabbalah is the Ein Sof, the unknowing and unknowable sea of mind, or matter, out of which creation emerges. The doctrine of the Ein Sof, says the Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, is the starting point of all Kabbalistic speculations. God is the infinite, unlimited being, to whom one neither can nor may attribute any attributes whatever. Kabbalah, page 472 of the Jewish Encyclopedia. Maimonides, pillar of Talmudism in the Middle Ages, quote, contributed to the Kabbalistic doctrine of the Ein Sof by his teachings that no attributes could be ascribed to God unless it be of Pythagorean origin, end quote. This quote can be found on page 465 of the same encyclopedia. Pythagoras was a pagan sorcerer who set up a dictatorship along Iron Curtain lines, and who attributed creative powers to letters and numbers, as does the Jewish Kabbalah. The 10 intelligences of pagan Aristotle, that is the sun, moon, and 7 planets, each ruled by a ruling spirit who dominates affairs of the universe, in accordance with the complicated astrological time charts, are paralleled by the 10 Sephirot of the theoretical Kabbalah. 3 triads, the male and female spawners and their offspring, plus the overall or Ein Sof form of design representing every condition of life, every quality from A to Z. Sex is the glorifying king and queen. The soul supposedly transmigrates around and back into the unknowing and unknowable source, the Ein Sof, into a condition of nirvana, knowing nothingness, like Hinduism. Quote, Jewish mystics describe the highest degree of love of man for God in sensuous forms in terms taken from marital life, end quote. Page 465 of the Jewish Encyclopedia. And then on page 476, it reads, closely connected is the doctrine of the transmigration of the soul, of which the Kabbalah lays great stress, end quote. There are 10 classes of angels, with their chiefs presided over by Metatron, who is changed into fire. This concept is on page 475. Metatron is the ruler spirit of this universe in Talmudic Judaism, and linked to the sun god, called by another sect Mithra. The 10 Sephirot, or intelligences, of the Kabbalah are designed as male and female procreative agencies. Kether, or crown, or the I Am, emanates the masculine or male potency, and from this the feminine or passive potency. The union of the masculine and feminine potencies produced again, and so the male and female Sephirot spawn along. Thus each triad is compounded of force, counterforce, and their connecting link, namely active and passive agents in combination. The Kabbalah, as expounded by Jewish author Ginsburg, lays down as Doctrine 1 of the Kabbalah, quote, God is boundless in his nature. He had neither will, intention, desire, thought, gauge, nor action. Continuing, he cannot be grasped and depicted, and for this reason is called Ein Sof, and as such, he is in a certain sense non-existent. He is not the direct creator of the universe, since he could not will the creation, end quote. Then comes mention of the self-activating emanations, the 10 Sephirot, and the different worlds gradually and successively evolved. These evolutionary worlds are the brightness and the express image of their progenitors, the Sephiroth, which uphold all things, end quote. I want to do that again. I didn't like that. These evolutionary worlds are the brightness and the express image of their progenitors, the Sephiroth, which uphold all things, end quote. The Sephiroth create the souls, and the souls must return to the source, whence it emanated. The creature shall not then be distinguished from the creator. Note, this is nothing but the nirvana of Hinduism, which Webster defines as the extinction of individual existence by absorption of the soul into the Supreme Spirit. And continues the publication, the soul will rule the universe, he shall command and obey God. In the view of the distinction between Brahmins, the untouchables, and Hindu castes, and the difference in Talmudism between the Gentile asses, who have no human status, alive or dead, and Jewish humans. It will be easy to see who is supposed to do the ruling and who does the obeying. God himself being but a lump, a mass, an essence, a source stream for man to work. Title: Theoretical Kabbalah. Two qualities dominate the theoretical Jewish Kabbalah. Every attribute of intelligence, of knowing, loving, or ruling is stripped from the God of the Bible and handed over to pagan spirits, who are invoked as in ancient paganism as other gods, those which were so often denounced by the prophets. This act of stripping God of intelligence and reducing him to a mass of self-percolating essence, the Ein Sof, is nothing but pantheism, the sum of nature being God, without any supreme being. Whether called emanation by the Jewish Kabbalah, immanence by Talmudic Spinoza, or renamed by Hegel, for, quote, the real and ideal is taught in the same way in the Kabbalah as in Hegel, end quote. Jewish Encyclopedia 474. Or designated dialectical materialism by Karl Marx. The result is the same old atheistic concept of nature, just waiting for man to run and dominate it. The Luciferian God is always man. The great heresy of Gnosticism, which nearly swept Christianity from the earth in the early centuries, is admittedly Kabbalistic. And the Gnostic and the Kabbalistic idea that evil is non-existent is currently revived in Christian Science, which is neither Christian nor scientific, and has been a magnet for hundreds of thousands of Jews who can, as the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia states, be Christian scientists without deserting their Talmudism. This encyclopedia states, quote, as the divine has true being, evil is that which has no being, the unreal or seeming thing as it appears, page 477, and, quote, on page 620, evil according to the Kabbalistic philosophy is non-existent, anticipating Christian sciences, end quote. Title: Practical Kabbalah. Every pagan trick of dethroning God and enthroning individual spirits is employed by the Jewish Kabbalist. Quote, casting of lots, necromancy, exorcism, bibliomancy, and the mysticism of numbers and letters were developed into complete systems. Hence the Kabbalistic doctrine of the heavenly alphabet, whose signs are the constellations and the stars. Thus, astrology was legitimized, and bibliomancy found its justification in the assumption that the sacred Hebrew letters are not merely signs for things, but implements of divine powers by means of which nature may be subjugated, end quote. Says the Jewish Encyclopedia under Kabbalah on page 479. But the bloody business of making circles to circumscribe the spirits, of gouging out cocks' eyes, skinning lambs, and throwing the blood around to weird incantations to bring up the specters of the departed, as forbidden by Scripture, is hidden as an esoteric or secret lore entrusted to such as the Jewish Baal Shems. Title: Transmigration of the Souls. Reincarnation or transmigration of souls is a doctrine of the Kabbalah generally. Failing to wash off the demons of the lands may turn one into a river, says the Jewish Encyclopedia under Transmigration of Souls. The theory is the cause of much degradation in Hinduism. In the Kabbalah, each soul corresponds to a part of the body of the Adam-Kadmon universe, some being lower organs, some higher. The Dibuk, or possessing spirit, who can only be expelled by a Baal Shem, wonder worker, came into the Jewish press recently, 1955, when a Dibuk is alleged to have been seen living the body of its unwilling host. Jewish press publications all carried the report. A newsreel I saw in recent years showed the knife-sticking and goat-bleeding Hindu rites of Kali in India. Horrible sights. Kali, to quote, is, quote, a Hindu goddess. She is represented as black with 4 arms, wearing a necklace of skulls, and the hands of slaughtered giants around her waist as a girdle. Her eyebrows and breasts appear streaming with blood of monsters she is slain and devoured. One hand holds a sword, another a human head. She is the goddess of death and destruction, and goats and other animals are sacrificed on her altars. Ancient Hindu books even enjoyed human sacrifices to this bloodthirsty goddess. Her worship is said to be characterized by vile secret rites. In sex, filth, degrading treatment of baby girls, low status of women, and the caste system, Talmudic Judaism and Hinduism are closely allied. Whereas the appeasement of many spirits is secreted in Judaism and is open in Hinduism, the caste system, which numbers some 2,000 Hindu castes and subcastes, is much simplified in Judaism. There being put two castes, the human and the animals, that is, the Jew and the non-Jew, the Brahmin, or the semi-divine Jew, and the non-Jewish untouchable. Title: The Zohar, principal work of the Kabbalah. The Zohar has been translated in several large volumes. It is more degenerately pornographic, if that were possible, than the Talmud itself. The Zohar is a veritable library. Like the Talmud, it seeks to nullify all the literal meaning of the Bible. This the Zohar does by allegorizing, whereas the sages of the Talmud always give as higher meanings, their own reversal of biblical moral laws. The Zohar, in more fanciful and in sex language, seeks to reduce to nature the whole of life and to deify man. Based upon the Kabbalistic method and doctrines, the principal characteristic of Gnosticism was the harmonizing of opposites, or syncretism. By this means, black can be represented as white. That Lucifer always arrays himself as an angel of light is a biblical truth. Quote, "Therefore it is no great thing if his ministries also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." 2 Corinthians 11:14. The Kabbalah was the basis of Gnosticism, which today is expressed through such organizations as the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which deceives the unknowing public that there can be brotherhood between Christ and Antichrist. Zohar, which means brightness, the principal work of the Kabbalah, starts the section in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia and includes this, quote, "Kabbalistic groups raise the Zohar to the same rank as that given to the Talmud. The reading of the Zohar was regarded as a religious duty by the Hasidism and by the Oriental Jews, and some parts of the Zohar were used liturgically. The Zohar's teachings combine practically all the elements of the older Kabbalah, the doctrines of the primordial man, Adam Kadmon, of the Sephiroth, of creation and the Merkabah, number and letter mysticism, especially in reference to the names of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia, 1905 version, on the Zohar states, quote, "It contains a complete Kabbalistic theosophy and calls it not the work of a single author, under which subtle the close relationship to Hinduism is cited. Quote, it is necessary to ascertain where and when the Jews became intimately acquainted with the Hindu philosophy, which more than any other exercise as influence on the Zohar, and emphasis on the similarity follows. The Mohammedan Sufis had similar doctrines. Quote, all these sects had their sacred writings, which they kept secret, and these writings probably formed the nucleus of the Zohar." End quote. One section is described as, quote, explaining scripture mystically by way of gematria, the doctrine of metempsychosis, the importance of washing the hands. The Zohar repeatedly endeavors to impress upon the mind of the reader that the biblical narratives and ordinances contain higher truths in addition to the literal meaning. The Zohar, in its later form, after the 13th century, spread among the Jews with remarkable celerity. Representatives of Talmudic Judaism began to regard it as a sacred book and to invoke its authority in the decision of some ritual questions. Title: Glorification of Man. The same encyclopedia notes that Jews, quote, were attracted by its glorification of man, its doctrine of immortality. The Zohar declared him to be the Lord of creation. Indeed, according to the Zohar, man influences the ideal world of the Sephiroth, Although the Sephiroth expect everything from the Ein Sof itself is dependent upon man." End quote. As noted previously, the Ein Sof is the mass called God, a mindless, self-proculating essence, unknowing and unknowable. The Darwinian theory of evolution, like the Spinoza theory of immanence, pantheism, are similar Kabbalistic ideas in New Word form. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia will tell you how when the Dutch began to call the theories of Spinoza by their right name, atheism, his own Kabbalah teachers, who were members of the Beth Din, which is a Talmud law court, quickly excommunicated him to prevent more unpopularity from fastening upon the already unpopular Jewish community. He is born in Judaism, the title of Blessed Spinoza. All that he did was to voice the Kabbalah, a foundation of the basically atheistic Jewish Babylonian Talmudic religion. Karl Marx, himself, son of a Jewish rabbi, called the Ein Sof by a still fancier name, dialectical materialism, the mindless bashing of germ, to fish to mammal, to ape to man, with the Jewish-spawned Marxist revolution as its crown and triumph. Title: Procreation is God. Says the Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, Zoharic elements crept into the liturgy of the 16th and the 17th centuries, the characteristic features of which were the representation of the highest thoughts by human emblems and human passions, and the use of erotic terminology to illustrate the relations between man and God. Religion being identical with love, sensuous pleasure, and especially intoxication, typify the highest degree of divine love as ecstatic contemplation, while the wine room represents merely the state through which the human qualities merge or are exalted into those of the deity. End quote. There is nothing new here that pagans who consulted the oracles indulged in drunken and sex degeneracies to worship the old sex gods, who are the deities of all pagan civilizations, did not have centuries and centuries ago. No wonder the unsparing denunciations of the prophets have to be allegorized away into nothing. Tied up in the Zohar and Kabbalah, generally, are the doctrines of metempsychosis, or transmigration of the souls, the worship of the 7 planets, sun, moon, and the overall Ein Sof, diagrammed as the 10 Sephiroth, which propel themselves out and back into the mass. The Ein Sof, and which also corresponds with the pagans' Aristotle's 10 intelligences, or boss spirits, of the heavenly bodies. Title: Shalom, Divine Talmudists, Holy Communion. Gershom Shalom, whose lectures here at Red Rabbi Wise's Institute of Judaism in New York were compiled as, quote, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, has been listed in Who's Who in World Jewry, as holding the chair of Jewish Mysticism at Hebrew University, Palestine. His excerpts from the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, in 1949, are revealing. Quote, The Book of Zohar, the most important literary work of the Kabbalah, a work of secret wisdom, he calls it. Like the Talmud, which uses the Bible verses which admittedly are not there, the Zohar uses a non-existent verse to portray the Talmudists as divine. The divine presence as the mystical embodiment of the community of Israel. Blasphemously, in Baal worship style, intercourse is called Holy Communion. Quote, God chose Israel and none other from among the peoples and established them in the world as a single unique nation. He called them one nation. When is one said of a man? When he is male together with female, then and only then he is designated one without mar of any kind. Only when male and female are conjoined do they form a single body. Whereas, and this we have learned, if a man is not wedded, he is, we may say, divided in two. This is Holy Communion. End quote. The section of the book, The Rose of Sharon, is another intercourse scene in which, quote, the community of Israel is called Rose of Sharon, Because her desire to be watered from the deep stream, she is named Rose. When she is about to join with the king, and after she has come together with him in her kisses, she is named Lily. End quote. That excerpt, extended, however, is not enough. The rabbis are quoted on, quote, the true devotion of the community of Israel to God and her longing for him. For these souls make possible the flow of the lower waters toward the upper. And this brings about the perfect friendship and the yearning for mutual embrace in order to bring forth fruit. When they cleave one to another, then says the community of Israel in the largeness of her affections, set me a seal upon thy heart. There's much more of the same. With that diversity of spelling characteristic of the Talmudists, God is called in Sholom's study of the Zohar, the Ein Sof, the infinite. Neither shape nor form has he, and no vessel exists to contain him, nor any means to apprehend him. End quote. And then comes a vicious attack on Christianity, so common in Talmudism. Our crime is in ascribing intelligence to God and accepting Christ's words that he is the personification of the Father, a real and loving Spirit. John 14:9 says, he that hath seen me hath seen the Father. The Zohar, quote, woe to the man who would make bold to identify the Lord with any single attribute, and the less so any human form existent. There is neither attribute, nor likeness, nor form in him. Sholom's work on the Zohar also states, quote, the names and grades of the soul of man are three. Nephesh, which is the vital soul, Ruha, which is the spirit, and Neshama, which is the innermost soul. The three are comprehended, one within the other, but each has its separate abode. While the body in the grave is decomposing, Nephesh tarries with it, and it hovers about in this world, going here and there among the living. Ruha betakes itself into the earthly garden of Eden. On Sabbaths, new moons, and festival days, it ascends up into the supernal sphere, or supernatural sphere. But Neshama ascends forthwith to her place in the domain from which she emanated. When the children of men betake themselves to the graves of those who are gone, then Nephesh is wakened, and it goes out to bestir Ruha, which then rouses Neshama. End quote. Title: The Kabbalah and the World. The world is explained by a chart representing three copulating triads, male, female, and offspring, given fantastic names. The Ein Sof surrounding these is the God essence which percolates through the three sets back into itself. According to the pantheistic Kabbalah, God has no intelligence. To quote, God is the infinite and unlimited being, to whom one neither can nor may ascribe any attributes whatever, who can therefore be designated merely as Ein Sof, without end. Describing the 10 Sephirot, which include the three spawning triads, the same source designates as Yesod, which is foundation, the reproductive element, the root of all existence. End quote. Under the title Kabbalah, the 1943 Universal Jewish Encyclopedia emphasizes the same idea, but the Ein Sof, being boundless, cannot become the direct creator, for he has neither will, intention, desire, thought, language, nor action, attributes which belong to finite beings. Title: Metatron. Metatron is the prince of this world, the demiurge in the Talmud and Kabbalah. He is the same as the Persian sun god Mithra, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia. With God a formless lump without any attributes, someone has to be ruler, and Metatron, Mithra, is it. The Talmud sometimes gives the Ein Sof an almost comic character with big feet, splashing with the big fish in the sea, and teaching dead children the Torah 1/4 of the day. But Metatron teaches them 3/4. This last, in the Talmud Abadah, Zara 3b, is cited by the Jewish Encyclopedia, and also his being Lord of all the heavenly hosts, of all treasures, of secrets. The Zohar defines his nature exactly by declaring that he is a little lower than God, end quote. He is not only identified here with Zoroastrian Mithra, the sun god, but in articles about Merkabah. He is seen as inflamed with incantations, dope, and other means, as comparable to the demiurge. Under Merkabah, the Jewish Encyclopedia describes the spiritualistic Mithra rites of Metatron, whose name letters add up to those of Shaddai, which means God. Non-Jews are unaware that using letters for numbers, gematria, is as prevalent today in Pharisaic Judaism as it was at the time of Christ. Title: Letters create the world, not God. Note in Exhibit 285 herein that through the Kabbalah, quote, one may thus easily make himself master of creation, end of quote, a Luciferian idea. Also, wild animals can be slain, and, quote, terror diffused through the world, end quote. Note in Exhibit 288 that letters of the alphabet, especially of the four-letter word for Jehovah, the Tetragrammaton, have magic power. In fact, the letters created the world. It is stated that this idea, quote, seems to have originated in Chaldea, end quote, which is Babylonia. That the rabbis worked the Kabbalah and created a third-grown calf and ate it is cited as coming from the Talmud in Sanhedrin 67b. This is reproduced herein as Exhibit 78. Demonism is the subject of also Exhibit 77, 79, and 80, which are from the Talmud. Title: Kabbalah exalts the Jew. The Kabbalah says the Jewish Encyclopedia taught the top position of man. Quote from page 479. The true Jewish view of life, and one that appalled to Talmudic Judaism. The Jew as well as the man was recognized in the Kabbalah. Notwithstanding the strongly pantheistic coloring of its metaphysics, the Kabbalah never attempted to belittle the importance of historic Judaism, but on the contrary, emphasized it. The Kabbalists developed a Jewish magic, page 478. Demonology, therefore, occupies an important part in the work of many Kabbalists. Many Kabbalists developed their theories on casting of lots, necromancy, and exorcism. Astrology was legitimized, and bibliomancy found its justification in the assumption that the sacred Hebrew letters are not one. With that old pagan deification of man idea, in which nature as a whole is God, and man is the doer, merely signs for things but implements of divine powers by means of which nature may be subjugated. End quote. Title: The Kabbalah, Sefer Raziel. Sefer means book. Sefer Raziel, meaning Book of Secrets, is an ancient Kabbalistic book. The usual pretext to call pagan practices Jewish is to attribute them to some old patriarch such as Abraham, who has been dead for centuries and is unable to deny this attribution. This one is linked to Noah, Abraham, Shem, and so on. However, the voodoo in it is as old as the pagan philosophers themselves. Barakoth 55a from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia says, quote, the book contains mystic lore on the letters of the alphabet and various magic recipes and amulets. From the Talmud, we learn that the alphabet played an important role in the creation of the world. Sefer Raziel states that Adam engraved the letters out of the likeliness of the fallen angels, or demons, from Aleph to Tav. Every angel must appear as soon as his name is uttered. Bezalel, the builder of the tabernacle in the wilderness, knew how to combine the letters by which heaven and earth were created. End quote. Although the Bible refers to Bezalel only as a workman inspired to serve God in his efforts on the tabernacle, the Talmud makes him into a demon evoker, a great intellect, of whom Moses was jealous. Bible references to Bezalel are Exodus 31:2, 35:30, 36:1-2, 37:1, 38:22, 1 Chronicles 2:20, and 1:5. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia states, quote, "The most important letters of the alphabet are, of course, those which spelt out the tetragrammaton, or name of God. This word is not to be pronounced as written, but must be read as Adonai. The Lord in each letter has a special potency. The belief in the power of the word was common to all the religions of antiquity. Thus, the Platonists had notions of the influence of anagrams made out of the name of persons. In the Talmud, there are many passages to indicate the rabbis were familiar with the various methods of permutation of the letters of the alphabet. The first was that of codes. The second was the anagram, in which the letters of a word were reshuffled to form a new word. The third was gematria, based on the numerical value of the letters. The fourth was notarikon, which took each letter of a given word as the initial of another word, and thus interpreted it in mystic fashion." End quote. The Kabbalist's special alphabet is diagrammed. Title: The Kabbalah Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, is another voodoo Kabbalistic compilation, frankly emanating from Chaldea, or Babylon. To quote the Jewish Encyclopedia under Kabbalah, the belief in the magic power of the letters of the Tetragrammaton and other names of the deity seems to have originated in Chaldea. The theurgic Kabbalah, under the name of Sefer Yetzirah, induced Babylonian rabbis of the 4th century to create a calf by magic, found in Sanhedrin 65b and 67b. Merkabah writes, inspired by dope, incantations, etc., at the end of which the sun god, Mithra, called Talmudism Metatron, ruler of the world, and then referred to. One familiar with the Isaiah's description of the satanic Antichrist of the Babylonian world government now rising is struck with the following words concerning one's ability to be master of creation by means of the Sefer Yetzirah, making the nether spirits obey and raise one to knowledge and power through Kabbalistic know-how. The Jewish Encyclopedia states, quote, "Practical Kabbalah, or the art of employing the knowledge of the hidden world in order to attain one's purpose, is founded upon the mysticism developed in the Sefer Yetzirah. According to this work, God created the world by means of the letters of the alphabet, which he combined in the most varied ways. If one learns these combinations and permutations, and applies them at the right time and in the right place, one may thus easily make himself master of creation." Then the ridiculous statement appears that these formulate all proclaim monotheism. Note from the same section of the Jewish Encyclopedia that by writing demonistic amulets on a fetus, that is, an unborn creature or child, the rousing of demons can sometimes be accomplished with success. By monotheism, the Talmudists really are saying pantheism, which is the pagan concept that the sum total of all nature is God, an unknowing, unknowable, massive essence, spirit or matter, of which the universe is composed without the anthropomorphic God of the Bible, which the Pharisees have proudly eliminated, transferring all the powers attributed to him to intermediary powers. Yes, to those hosts of pagan spirits or gods of which Metatron, the sun god, is chief today. Plato, Pythagoras, and the pagans the prophets tried to reach during the long centuries before Christ had the same monotheistic world in which they, as these supermen, could make themselves master of creation and dictators of the people. Stripped of its deceptions and falsehoods, there is nothing monotheistic about Judaism, nor does it have anything in common with Christianity, to which it is irrevocably and diametrically opposed. Okay, that is end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 will be about Judaism and paganism. Thank you for listening.